Ben and Jessica, good to see you all. Janice, nice to see you. Well, welcome to our monthly public education seminar, which is co-presented today by Mental Health America of Kentucky and the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. We are so proud to offer these monthly or sometimes twice a month free public education seminars where we're able to bring diverse voices and expert voices to a variety of topics to increase knowledge of mental health concerns and care and resources that are available across the Commonwealth. We are really proud today to have Dr. Kirai Rose with us, who will be sharing with us supporting mental and emotional wellness in teens. Welcome, Kirai. It's good to see you.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Thank you. Just with a little bit of introduction, let me tell our audience about you. Kirai Rose earned her PhD in counseling psychology from Western Michigan University, her master's in depth psychology from Vermont College, and a bachelor's in eating disorder counseling from Union Institute and University. Kirai's specialties in private practice include complex post-traumatic stress disorder, disordered eating, racial and anti-racist identity development, adoptive foster narratives, obsessive compulsive disorder, codependency, and perfectionism. So she brings to us a wealth of information, both in practice and in her education. We're very excited to have her. Her approaches in therapy include depth psychology, polyvagal theory, accelerated resolution therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and relational cultural theory. Um, I am so proud to work on the Kentucky Psych Foundation board with Kirai, and I've heard her speak before, and I know she's going to bring a lot of great material to us today. Just to kind of have a little housekeeping, we will open with Kirai's presentation. Feel free to keep yourself on mute, video on or off, whatever's most comfortable for you and allows you to pay the best attention. As we go through, if you have questions or thoughts, feel free to drop those in the chat. And then based on time at the end, we may have some time for some facilitated questions, which I will read from the chat. And without any further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Rose.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about supporting mental and emotional wellness in teens. And my goal with this talk is to talk about how we can foster goodness and wellness more than focusing on what's wrong. Because a lot of times we have to focus on what's wrong, but we forget that we need to also know how to do things that help wellness. So my plan today with us is that we'll cover some information on development during teen years because it's just really good to remember what's normal when we're on the roller coaster with a teenager. We will also look into just some active interventions, some conceptual ways of thinking about things, and just some simple additions that you can do with your teen that will just kind of support you in what you're already doing as a parent or a guardian or a teacher or an uncle or an aunt, whatever. And to support wellness, but also to support your own wellness. Because I think that when we kind of are prepared and we can think about these things in a healthy way, it just makes us feel healthier about what we're doing with our teenagers. So this is a really big topic. We're definitely not going to be able to cover it comprehensively in an hour, but I do hope that you'll be leaving with some tools in your toolkit, and I hope we'll have some time to answer questions at the end. So one thing that I really like to emphasize is that teenagers do have a wellness state that is normal. We forget this a lot in our world. We forget that it is our normal, natural state to feel well and to feel healthy. We do a lot of having to deal with symptoms and that kind of thing. So we forget that our system is actually designed to come back to wellness, to heal, to regulate. Our system is designed that way, and that is our natural state. So just like our earth shows us that seeds grow, flowers grow, trees grow when they get what they need, so does a teenager. So the more that we can expose a teenager to the things that they naturally need, the more their system will veer back toward wellness, regardless of what they're dealing with. And that state of wellness is going to be unique for each person based on their personality and based on who they are. And all of that is person to person. So, even if there are some concerns, which a lot of times there are, around mental health, around learning outcomes, anything like that, if a teenager is struggling, that's pretty normal too. But that doesn't mean that wellness is not achievable. So, let's always just remember that wellness is natural. Our system wants to be well, it wants to be balanced. So, what we're doing today is talking about how we can have wellness focused interventions and moments with our teenagers to just keep on supporting that direction. So, one thing I like to talk a lot about with people is that, we have this lovely DSM 5 that we have to use for diagnosis and for insurance coverage and all of that. And the DSM 5 is a very useful tool, but the DSM 5 gives us lists of symptoms. It does not give us descriptions of people. And so when we're talking about symptoms that a teenager or ourselves might be dealing with, we are not talking about who we are. A diagnosis is not an identity. And this is a tough one right now, I think, especially in our culture, because there's a lot of a rise in awareness around mental health. And therefore, there's a lot of content about mental health on social media. And so, me and a lot of therapists I know have this phenomenon now that happens where we have a first session with somebody and they show up and give us a meme on their phone and say, I think I have bipolar disorder because this meme really resonates with me. And while that is understandable based on the perspective of a teenager, it's also not the same thing as a diagnostic process. And nobody has an identity that is a diagnosis. So we always have to keep that in mind, that even when we're dealing with concerns, those concerns don't define anybody. So let's talk a little bit about development and what can be expected. What's quote unquote normal during teenage years? Because a lot of times teenage years don't feel normal to us when we're parenting or when we have a teenager in our life, or if we're teaching teenagers, it feels a little bit unpredictable and strange, but it's really because we forgot what it was like to be a teenager. So, according to Erickson, who's one of the most well-standing developmental psychologists in our field, between the ages of 12 and 18, teenagers experience a conflict. So each developmental stage has a conflict that seeks to be resolved. And so during teenage years, the conflict that seeks to be resolved is the conflict between identity and role confusion. So teenagers are really striving to figure out who they are. They're trying to answer that question, who am I? So it's very normal and natural during those years for teenagers to do a lot of exploration, a lot of like passionate investment in a certain style or a certain fandom or a certain group of friends or a certain sport. It's like that thirst to have something be their thing that they can hold on to and have it be their identity. And so, because of all that exploration, they're trying to work out role confusion and eventually, in young adulthood, land on an identity. And so, developmentally, that's what's happening. So, one of the things that happens during teenage years is that teenagers start to have relationships that are independent of their home relationships. So, when our kids are young, we kind of decide who they're going to be around. We decide what little camps they go to. We decide who we have play dates with, that kind of thing. Who we allow to come over to our house, where we allow our kids to go. During teenage years, that starts to shift. So teenagers are making their own relationships with peers and their own relationships with other adults, independent of us. So coaches, teachers, peers, all of those kind of amplify as a sphere of influence. So teenagers start to look away from the home environment for information, for guidance, to know what's going on in the world. And that can feel a little bit frightening for us sometimes when we want our kids to live our values, right? And so a good analogy for this is a food analogy where we want our kids to have a wide palate when it comes to food. We want them to be comfortable trying new things, tasting food from different cultures and that kind of thing. So what we do when we allow for this exploration to happen and teenagers are looking to other people for influences, we could think of it as they're expanding their tolerance. They're expanding what they think of as normal beyond what our nuclear family has shown us. And that is going to be a mixed bag, like it is for all of us, but it's a really nice expansion. Just like when we taste different foods, we won't like all of them, but the more foods we taste, the wider our palate gets, the more we can tolerate. So it's a healthy thing. So during this time too, teens start to question and challenge their parents' values. And this is because they're starting to individuate. They're starting to think of themselves as somebody that is an individual that isn't only a part of a family. And that's just a developmental fact that they start to realize that during the teenage years. And so the nice thing to remember is that there's a lot of longitudinal research that shows us that even though teens veer away oftentimes from the values of their nuclear family, a lot of times in young adulthood, they've come back to whatever was the main influence at the beginning in certain ways. It's not always like all the way, but in certain ways, there are certain things that stick. So what we have to remember is once our kids reach teenage years, we've already had a huge influence, the biggest influence they're ever going to have, we've had already on them while their brain was forming. And so this developmental phase of exploration isn't necessarily going to threaten our influence. It's just going to expand it and allow for this exploration to happen. And that is a healthy thing. So there's a need for more freedom. Teenagers naturally have this drive to explore, and it makes them want to be free. It's tricky, right? Because with freedom comes responsibility. That's an existential psychology tenet. As much freedom as you have is as much responsibility as you have. But for teenagers, they don't have certain developmental things in their brain that allow them to wield that well. So my advice is to stay close to your teenager while they're exploring this freedom. Stay close and pay attention so that you're there to catch them when things go awry, because they will. That's normal. So during this time too, teenagers begin to explore their own views. They start to think in different ways. They start to think abstractly. So a developmental psychologist named Piaget used to ask this question, and there was a comparison between what we call concrete thinkers, which are like school age kids, and then middle school and high school kids. And there was a question that he would pose about how there was a married couple and the wife was very sick. They needed a certain medicine. The medicine was available, but the couple did not have the money. And they tried to get it from the drug company on a discount, and they would not budge and would not give it to them. So the man ended up stealing the medicine to save his wife's life. And that question of what do you think about that would be posed to these two different developmental stages. The younger concrete thinkers would answer, stealing is bad. That was the wrong thing to do, because it's very concrete, very black and white, follow the rules. But in middle and high school, a different part of the brain starts to turn on, and there starts to be more of an abstract depth where there starts to be more answers like, well, I think that that man's wife's life was more important than following the rule. So maybe he could pay them back, even though he stole it because he needed to steal it, because he needed to save his wife's life. So there starts to be a little more gray area, and that's kind of where the teenage brain starts to take us in terms of moral questioning. So an important thing to remember about teenage development is the imaginary audience. These years, the imaginary audience kicks in, which means our teenagers are always constantly suddenly thinking about how everyone else might see them. So this is exacerbated by social media and everything being on phones and cameras all the time now, where it's probably true that people are looking and filming and all that stuff. It's quite overwhelming for teenagers these days. And so remembering that they're always already thinking about how other people might see them, you can imagine the kind of pressure that they're under, because they have a lot of years to go before they can get to the point that they would have the ability and the identity formed to be able to not care what other people think. It's very normal for them to care what other people think right now. And another piece of this is during this phase of development, a lot more deep thinking happens. And this again is amplified by social media, where all of the world's tragedies are right in front of our face all the time. So, because of that, teenagers start to have really strong opinions, passionate responses to the things that they're seeing, to the tragedies that they're being exposed to. And that naturally brings on big existential questions like, what is this all for? What happens when we die? Why is this going on? If God exists, why do these bad things happen? Those are the kinds of questions that teenagers start to naturally wonder about, and it can be very overwhelming. So another reason to stay really close and pay close attention to what's going on with our teenagers. So let's talk a little bit about brain development. The teen brain is exactly that. It's the teen brain. So I strongly recommend that we all work really hard to not expect teenagers to act like adults. And this can be hard because teenagers can be very frustrating. And so it's okay. But we can't expect teenagers to function like adults. If we do that, we are going to be chipping away at their self-esteem and their self-worth. So as a protective factor to preserve self-worth and self-esteem, we need to be realistic about where teenagers are in brain development. That way we can support them realistically and not based on some fantasy of how we want our kids to behave and how we want them to think. Like we want them to get it, cause and effect and all of that. They're not there yet. And that's because their brain acts differently than an adult brain. So one thing that I think is important that comes from developmental psychology, a psychologist named Vygotsky came up with the zone of proximal development. So this zone is a place where you are in a learning process where things aren't so easy that you're not engaged, but they're not so challenging that you want to give up. And for teenagers in particular, it can be kind of hard to know where that zone is because they want all that freedom. They want to be able to explore. They want to be able to do things on their own, but they can't always. So a part of the zone of proximal development is we want challenges that do challenge us, but that sometimes we need support with, or we need someone to help us a little bit so that we can keep engaging in the learning process. And you can see it when teens get to that place where it's too much of a challenge, they give up. When teens aren't engaged, they zone out. And so we want to get them engaged and keep them challenged without that overwhelm. So part of that zone of proximal development is realizing that teens are going to struggle. It's very normal to struggle. So one thing that we can help with, teens sometimes internalize this idea, if I'm struggling, there's something wrong. If I'm struggling, I've failed. If I'm struggling, I must not be doing what other people are doing because they're doing it right and I'm doing it wrong. That's a very common way that teens internalize what's happening when they're struggling. So we can normalize the fact that they're going to struggle in life, and we can support the idea that your struggle is what is growing your brain. It's what's growing your muscles, so to speak. It is how you are learning how to do these things. And there's no way to do it without struggle. Struggle is just a part of human life, and that comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is rooted in Buddhism. So continuing on with teen brain development. So these two parts of the brain, the amygdala, which is our emotional center in the brain, it is like our passion center. It's the thing that feels really strongly. And if you have teenagers in your life, you know that this is turning on and it's very active. It's that I must do this right now because I feel it so strongly. It's that kind of feeling. So the frontal cortex in an adult brain, the frontal cortex is what balances out the amygdala. It's the one that says, okay, I am feeling a lot right now, and let me take some breaths so that I can make a decision through reason. Teenagers don't quite have that yet. So there will be a lot of mistakes made because the amygdala fires and the teenager is passionate about something and a bunch of words fly out of their mouth or they make a decision rashly. And then later they go, oh, when there's this big consequence, they go, oh, I didn't even consider that. Well, yeah, of course you didn't, because that part of your brain is not developed yet. This is how you learn. This is how that brain gets developed, okay? So because they're guided more by emotional and reactive part of the brain, they're going to be less thoughtful, less logical. And that, again, is normal. It doesn't mean we don't want to support them in getting those abilities. It just means we don't want to expect it to be automatic right now between 12 and 18. And so research also shows, and there is a lot of exploration of drugs and alcohol during those years, that that can change and delay that development. So it can just kind of interrupt it or make it distorted at certain points. So another thing to remember is that teenagers need a lot of sleep. It's the phase of development most like infancy in terms of how much they're growing. So there's a lot of brain development, a lot of hormonal changes, and a lot of physical growth. And because of that, the body really needs rest. So our kids, our teenagers are often on rigorous schedules with sports and school, and they have to get up early and all of that. It's really important that we encourage them to get a lot of sleep, let them sleep in on the days they can. It's not them being lazy. They really genuinely do need the rest because they are developing so much. So that's a lot about development. Let's shift gears now and talk about what we can do. What do they need from us during this time? So there's a writer named David Rico who came up with this idea of the 5 A's. And these are the things that are needed to develop healthy self-esteem and identity. And so we can really go to this because we know that that's the conflict they're trying to resolve developmentally is identity versus role confusion. So the more that we can do things to support the development of a healthy identity, the better. So the first A is acceptance. So unconditional love and acceptance of who your teenager is, even as it changes and even if you don't like it. I know this sounds challenging, but it's so, so important. The world is going to be hard enough on our teenagers. They are dealing with so much stuff that comes at them in their phones every day and in their friend groups and at school. All of the fear that's being fed to them all the time in the world today. Not to mention they're more aware than ever of systems of oppression and all of the things that are trickling down in that way. So it's really important that they have some soft place to land where they are accepted as who they are, even if they're odd, even if they didn't shower that day, even if they have a smart mouth, like that we still are going to love and accept them, even if we don't like their behavior. So we want to care about what they're into and show interest and support. So sometimes just listening about something, their latest anime show or the post that they saw or what's going on in their friend group, even if it's of little interest to you, just being there because you're interested in them and showing support by showing interest in what they're talking about. And that is you showing that acceptance for them. Attention is the second A. So really setting aside specific time for you and your teenager. And again, in our culture, we tend to veer away from our teenagers when they get like this and they're brooding or they're too busy or whatever. We kind of give them more space, which is fine and appropriate for that freedom need. But at the same time, we do need to pay close attention and we need to have specific time for them. So any time to connect, right? Even if it's, hey, go to the grocery store with me. I'm going to get this from the grocery store. Let's just ride together. You can tell me about your day, right? Anything like that, that just gives some specific time for you and them, that you're together and you're in close proximity. And listen to them and show interest in what they're saying. Affection is another of the 5 A's. And this also can be a little complicated with teenagers because sometimes they're pushing away from us physically. So I really am a big believer in verbal affection, giving tons of compliments, because remember that imaginary audience is always looming for teenagers. So making sure that you're just really showering them with genuine compliments. Just even, especially maybe when they just woke up and they don't have makeup on or whatever, just being like, oh my gosh, I love your morning face. It's the same little face you had when you were little. I love that face, right? Or look how your eyes are sparkling today. I love your smile, right? Just anything that you can say to notice unique things about them, because they're always inundated with this idea that they're being judged. It's a developmental fact. So if we can counteract that and keep on building that healthy self-esteem and healthy identity with complimenting them and noticing these unique things, it goes a long way. Another piece of affection is physical affection. So if your teenager is open to it, ask, hey, can I give you a hug? First thing in the morning, last thing at night, look them in the eyes, give them a hug. that kind of physical affection, even if they're sort of like not asking you for it much, ask them for it because you can know that they need it and if they welcome it and if it's consensual. So another way to have that is just to be in close proximity. A lot of times in our nuclear family homes and the way that our culture is, where everybody has a TV in their room and all of that, we can kind of like everybody gets home and then separates into their own space. And sometimes it can just be helpful to be close physically. So be in the same room with them. Maybe you have some things to do on your laptop, just plop down on their bed while they're doing their thing in their room. My daughter does her nails or she's drawing or something, and sometimes I'll just go and sit on her bed and do my work, but we're in the same room. And lo and behold, she usually starts talking to me if I'm close to her, right? So just having time in the same room can make a big difference. Allowing is another one of the 5 A's. And the idea of allowing is allow them to be who they really are authentically. Again, with that imaginary audience and the world as it is, they're always going to feel like they should be different than who they are. So our home, our relationships with them needs to be a space where they can be who they are authentically and be loved and cared for. A part of this too is since we know they're trying to learn more about themselves and they're trying to figure out who they are and what they believe, give them some say, right? Things that are like more low stakes in your household, let them have some say over how that's going to go. Give them a choice. Let them decide what's going to happen with dinner one night or whatever, just so that they're more allowed to have their voice and to be a part of the household. The 5th A is appreciation. And this is a big one to counteract that imaginary audience and also to build that healthy self-esteem. So anything that your teenager does that's kind, that's helpful, really name it, even if it's very small. Thank you so much for emptying the dishwasher. I really appreciate that. Well, you told me to do it. I know, but I really appreciate that you did it. Right? So just keep appreciating them. When we appreciate people, we're basically saying to them, I am so glad you exist. And that is a message that teenagers really, really need. So I'm sorry, there's a weed eater going on outside my window. I hope that it's not disturbing our audio. So continuing on with what teens need during this time. So we want to focus on a growth mindset, right? So instead of a talent mindset, we want to focus on a growth mindset. We want to talk about how we're here to progress, not perfect. We're here to learn. And if we made a mistake and we learned, it was totally worth the experience, right? So we're going to be less result focused. Now, I will say in our culture, this is a very hard time. Teenage years, it's a very hard time to stay with the growth mindset because there's a lot of focus on what are you doing after high school? What do you want to be after you're out of school? Where do you want to go to college? What college are you going to get into? Your grades now matter. Colleges are going to look at those grades. There's all of this future prep stuff that really takes us out of the growth mindset and it makes us forget that it's what we're learning through the experience that matters. So the more that we can support that, even if it's just at home, the better. And we also want to encourage creativity. If you've listened to all of this stuff around development, you can tell there's a lot of energy in teenagers during this time. A ton of energy is moving. So because of that, we want to circulate that energy and find ways to circulate it. So physical activity is really good and creativity of any kind, playing a musical instrument, dancing, making art projects, anything like that is great for teenagers to do. And then if you've heard of that book, The 5 Love Languages, there's actually one for teenagers. And so this can be really helpful to know about your teenager. And some ways to think about it is, what really makes my teenager light up? When do they feel like they're really seen and heard and understood and loved? And so the 5 love languages are gifts, acts of service, quality time, physical affection, and words of affirmation. And so when thinking about your teen, it's like, do they respond most when you talk to them about how proud you are of them and what they've done? Or are they more like the kid that they feel super loved if they're gone and you like change their sheets and make their bed for them, right? That would be an act of service. So just kind of paying attention to what makes your teenager feel loved and do more of that. So one thing that we deal with a lot as psychologists is we deal with adults who weren't protected in certain ways during teenage years. And part of it is because it's tricky to know what teens need. It's tricky when they want all this freedom and they sort of look like adults and they can sort of talk like adults, but yet they're not really ready to totally protect themselves. So it's really important to stay close to our teenagers, know what's going on with them. It doesn't mean to be intrusive, but just pay attention so that they know that you care and that you're watching out for them. And that sends them the message they are worth being protected. And that is a really important thing for building that self-esteem. So connecting to something greater in some way is also something that teenagers need. And so that can show up in a lot of different ways. Some people interpret that from a faith perspective, and that's fine if a teenager is into that. But in the teenage years, it might show up more like finding a community of people or a group of friends, finding people who are all into the same music or the same show, and that being a part of a fandom. Sometimes it can be as simple as like really being into the earth, like being into hiking or doing things outdoors, because the earth is something greater. It's physically greater than we are. Another way this can show up is teenagers really wanting to be a part of a cause. So with that amygdala gland, right, where we start to feel things more strongly and more passionately, sometimes there's this really strong need to help people or to do something about what's going on in the world. And that can show up as that way of being a part of something greater by being a part of a cause. And so all of that connection actually helps us with evolving, because the most recent branch of our nervous system physically is called the ventral vagal system. And that system is all about social connection. So our evolution is telling us that we are going in the direction of needing to connect to each other in order to heal and be well. So any connecting that our teenagers can do is helping their wellness. So continuing on with what they need, this is, again, part of that zone of proximal development where we want them challenged and we want them engaged, but not overwhelmingly so, right? But part of this for us as the adults in their lives is to stop doing what they can do for themselves. And that doesn't mean that we stop requiring them to do what they need to do for themselves, but we stop doing it for them. So that will mean that they're going to make mistakes, but we already talked about normalizing struggle, right? So we can offer support if they get stuck, but the support looks a little different when we're working with teenagers and they're even just a simple thing like I can't open this cup or something. Then you can say, well, what do you think you need to do next? So through our support, we can slow down the moment and help them contact a different part of their growing brain so that they can think about what they're doing, maybe think about a tool they could use, or think about something else they could try. And we can be the brake pedal for them by slowing them down and offering support. So we don't want to prevent struggle. And again, as adults who care about teenagers, this is hard because all of us as adults are so excited about all the things we've learned. And we think, oh my gosh, I can save this teenager that I love from making these same mistakes by telling them everything that they should do that I've already learned. Well, that doesn't usually go so well. Teenagers really are told constantly by other people what they should do. And they're not even asking. Like they'll just start talking about something, and immediately an adult in the vicinity, well, you know what you should do then is this. It's very automatic for adults to try to prevent struggle and to provide the answer instead of supporting and allowing teenagers to struggle to find their own answers. So you can kind of see as we go through these lists of what teenagers need, there's this phenomenon that sometimes happens in family therapy where a family will come in with their teenager and the adults in the room are like, yeah, I'm glad we're here. You need to fix that teenager. When really a lot of the intervention work comes from changing how the adults are approaching things and getting them into this realistic view of what teenagers need and what's going on with teenagers. And that can be really hard to hear for people sometimes. But we do want to let them struggle, obviously within that zone of proximal development. We don't want to kick them away from us and not provide support and make them struggle. That's not what I'm saying. It's more like the normal struggles that will happen in life. We support them through it while also normalizing it for them so that they don't think that it's because they're doing something wrong. So part of being an adult in a teenager's life is learning how to listen differently. And again, we are not trained in these things, okay? In our society, we're trained to just do things. Do, fix, solve, do more, do better. The kind of listening that I'm talking about is the listening of connection. It's the listening of a holding space and allowing teenagers to unburden. As we've already discussed, they are carrying so much around with them. They are inundated with all of the things that are going on in the world. So for us to be a space where they can unburden is the greatest gift that we can give. And where we're not judging what they're saying, we're not trying to fix what they're saying, we're not trying to change how they're approaching it. Instead, we're basically saying, I'm going to hold space for you to work through this however you need to because I believe in you. That's a very different message than, okay, tell me the problem. I'm going to tell you how to fix it. Right? It's a totally different approach. So these bullet points at the bottom of the slide are here as just some ideas of how to help you provide that different type of listening to a teenager. So something that I do with my kids are 15 and 23. And something I still do with both of them is when they're talking and they're really struggling and they need to unburden. And it helps me because I am a problem solver. So when I need to not jump in and try to give them solutions, I just say, what else? I'm listening. And it's so amazing because every time I have said, what else? Or I'll say, what else, honey? I'm right here. I'm listening. They immediately start saying more. Sometimes they'll take a deep breath, which tells me their nervous system is resetting, and then they'll start talking more. And it's really sweet because you can see how much they really need that space and how little they get it. So another thing is, do you need to talk? And offering to hold space, saying, I can just listen. Okay. If you just need to talk and get out whatever's going on, I can just listen. Just go ahead and unburden, right? Now that does take some self-control. That takes us using our developed frontal cortex to hold our tongue, to not jump into solutions, and instead really focus on listening intently. And I think that something that we see when we start to do this with teenagers is we see, oh, I've been missing out on them. I've been so in trying to fix what they're doing or change what they're doing. I've missed their abilities. I've missed who they really are. I'm learning so much more about them now that I'm just letting them talk. And it can be really amazing because as we started today, wellness is our natural state. We are always trying to work back to wellness. A lot of times we've learned sort of distorted ways to do that, but it is our nature to be well. It's our natural state. So if we allow our kids the space, they will start taking steps in that direction. And so another way is to ask your teenager if they're talking a lot and they seem distressed and they're telling you everything, instead of giving them feedback, asking them if they would like some, right? So would you like some feedback? Do you want me to say anything right now, or do you just need to talk? Right? So that again, they have some say. You're allowing for them to have some sovereignty. And because of that, they might even say, actually, I do need some help with this. But giving them the option is respecting them, respecting their individuation, which is where they are right now. So a big piece of giving those 5 A's that we went over and giving our teens what they need during this time is attunement. Attunement is that phenomenon that we all need. All of us need it. We need it throughout our whole lives. It starts with needing it when we're infants, and we need our parent to attune to the type of cry that we have so that we can get our need met, all the way to being full adults and needing our partners or our friends or our colleagues to attune to what's going on with us. It's what makes us feel like we're not alone. So paying close attention, not in an overbearing way or a controlling way, but paying close attention to our teenagers by saying, I am so glad that you exist, and I really want to be a part of you existing. And I'm so grateful, right, that I'm here with you. That's what attunement does. It says, you're important to me, and I'm paying close attention to you because it's important. So, something that my daughter told me actually, she said that one of the hardest things for her is when she's at school and she's having a hard day and nobody asks her if she's okay, right? And I often ask her, like, hey, are you doing all right? A lot of the times the answer is, yeah, I'm fine. But the fact that I'm asking, that I'm checking in, shows that I'm paying attention. I'm tuning in. I want to know where she is. And that is giving her that message constantly that counters the imaginary audience, counters all the messages from social media, and says to her, you are already a success. You are already wanted. You already belong. So, one of the things that we also need to remember is the way we live as adults are an example for what our teenagers are going to be growing into. So, we can't be the one forcing all these answers on somebody if we are not taking some time as adults to move toward our own wellness, right? So, one of the ways as adults that we can really help be that solid place to which our teenagers can return when they individuate and then they come back is to really know our values and live them consistently and speak them out. And there are lots of things, if you wanted to look online, there are a bunch of different ways that you can sort of name and figure out what your values are. And I really recommend that families like say, these are our family values, put them on the wall, like mine are health, conscious connection, and authenticity. So if I know that about myself, it's much more likely that I'm going to live those values. Because if I've named them and I've done the work to name them, then I myself have a place to come back to. And of course, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have times I don't live those values, but then I can veer back and I can be an example of that for my teenagers. So another thing we want to model is using that frontal cortex to pause, to emotionally regulate, to not act from the amygdala gland. And this, as we show them this, and we accept our teenagers where they are in development, they can see, oh, that's what I'm growing toward. Doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means I'm a teenager. And when I'm an adult, it's going to be different. And I can see that in the people around me. So another piece of this is having reasonable boundaries. It really helps teenagers to see when a parent, like if, let's say our kids are in a place where they really like, they just need to talk, or they need some kind of interaction. And for me, it's like after work, when I come out of my office, if my kid is right there, sometimes I have to say, you know what, what you have to say is important to me, but I need 10 minutes. I need 10 minutes to decompress from my day, right? That's me setting a reasonable boundary. It's not me rejecting her. It's me just saying, this is what I need because I need to take care of myself. And once I give to myself, then I'm there to give to you. So the more that we can model that as adults, the better, because then they can see that that's an okay thing to do because they experience that, oh, somebody set a boundary with me. It doesn't mean that they're never going to be there for me. And it doesn't mean they don't love me anymore, right? It just means they're taking care of themselves. And oh, I can do that too. So practicing self-care, practicing self-love, very, very important to show. Now, I will say, especially, and I think it's for everybody. I shouldn't say that it's a gender-specific thing because I really do think it's for everybody. We have a lot of messages in our culture about what we're supposed to look like, right? And a lot of that comes from systems of oppression. And so the more that we can practice self-love, and self-love means right now, not how I'm going to be after I do this, not how I'm going to be after I fix this, but right now, loving, accepting myself as I am in the midst of my teenagers so that they can actually see what that's like. And that's us aligning with reality because reality is this is who we are right now. And who we are right now needs love. So we also need to model for our kids what it's like to get through difficulty while staying connected to support. So, like, if you have really good friends in your life, if you have a community in your life that really supports you, allowing your teenagers to see you rely on those people, even naming it, saying, you know what, I had a tough day. I'm going to go call my best friend. I need to talk, right? Or I'm going to go to a meeting tonight because that's really going to help me. I need people right now, right? So that ventral vagal nerve of social connection that helps us move toward wellness, that's universal. That's in all of our nervous systems. So if we can model that for our teenagers, it really helps them see what that looks like and how they can do that too. So we kind of already talked about that, but being kind to yourself and accepting yourself as you are, maybe even especially when you make mistakes, right? So instead of just like really being mean to yourself in front of your teenager, be like, one of my dissertation advisor would always say, still human. So just those kind of lighthearted responses to our own mistakes really can be helpful with our teenagers. I really too think it's so important for adults to apologize in our families, like for us to say, oh, you know what, I overreacted. Sorry about how I just spoke to you. That wasn't cool, right? I know for me, I went my whole life with my parents not apologizing to me. Um, and I think it's such an important thing to do, especially with teenagers, because we're saying, you don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. What's important is how we're going to respond to it, right? And so in your own life too, practicing being connected to whatever it is that's greater for you. For me, I hike every single day. It's my thing. It's how I decompress. It's how I feel connected to my environment. It's how I feel like I'm held by gravity. It's very healing for me. It's very good for me. And so I do that. My kids see me do that. So whatever it is for you, doesn't have to be what it is for me, but whatever it is for you that connects you to something greater, whatever it is, do that and show your kids how to do that too, and encourage them to do it as well. And so also, we need to be taking care of our own mental health. We want mental health and wellness for our teenagers, so we need to take care of ours as well. So reducing that stigma around asking for help, around going to therapy, going to groups, whatever groups or help we can plug into that's good for us, just being open about that and reducing any stigma, it goes a long way with our teenagers. So let's talk about, we've done a lot of talking about wellness and moving toward wellness. I do want to just take a moment here at the end to talk a little bit about when you do want to seek professional help for your teenager. And so my first point here is that any kind of counseling help is always a strong move, especially for teenagers. Something that I love about a therapeutic space is that it has no consequence anywhere else in our lives. So for that 1 hour in our week, no matter what we say, it's not going to affect what happens with other people because nobody else is going to hear it. It's our space. And teenagers really, really could use that, right? So that's why I say it's always a strong move, like providing that space for a teenager and saying, I want you to have this space where you can work stuff out loud and where you can even connect to somebody else who's healthy. That's always a strong move. And if you notice anything changing in your teenager that feels concerning, remember that if you seek help for them, that is you loving them. That's you caring. That's you showing them that they are important, how they feel is important, and what they're going through is important. And you're showing them, you know what? I don't have all the answers, but this person might have some of the answers for us, right? And I do encourage you to talk to your teenagers and ask them questions. Ask about how they're doing. If you notice that they're down a little more often, ask what's going on. Say, I notice you seem a little bit down. Or even like right in the moment, you seem kind of anxious right now. Are you okay? Right? What's going on? Should we take some deep breaths together? But connecting to them in reality with what you see so that they learn they don't have to hide those things from you. It's not an off limits topic. So family therapy, I think, is awesome. If you can make that happen with your teenager, it's so lovely in terms of learning how to rupture and repair. It's very common and normal in all of our relationships that we'll have rupture and repair. Learning how to do that in a way that we stay connected is so helpful. Also, clearing the air from anything from the past and then learning how to keep cultivating closeness while they're going through this very intense time in their lives. I will say that I do recommend formal assessment in certain cases. So sometimes we can just kind of, you know how when you go to the medical doctor and they give you a little depression screener or a anxiety screener, those are great. They're like, I'm for those for sure. And though those aren't enough to like deal with things in the case of trauma, severe trauma, anything that's severely disrupted, any kind of learning disabilities or difficulties, and any kind of suspected neurodevelopmental disorder like autism or ADHD, those things do require a formal assessment in order to be accurately diagnosed and effectively treated. So the reason I'm saying that is because sometimes symptoms of PTSD can look like symptoms of what we call persistent depressive disorder or long-term depression, or they can look like really intense anxiety. So knowing what we're dealing with is what guides treatment and makes treatment effective. So if you feel like you need it or any of those things are happening with your teenager, I do recommend seeking out a formal assessment so that you know exactly what you're dealing with. And as always, remember that 988 is always there. I recommend putting it on your teenager's phone so that they can never, ever not have someone to call. So that's a national mental health crisis line, and it's available 24/7, and you can call or text for mental health assistance. Okay. So that's what I have today. Thank you so much for being here and for showing up for you and for your kids.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose. I am aware we have about 4 minutes if there were any questions that wanted to be dropped into the chat. I know as a parent of a 14-year-old, I also received so much out of your talk today. I do hope that others who were here with us were able to take away some great lessons and ideas. Just as a final bit of housekeeping, following today's webinar, we will have the video on our website for availability for those who attended today. Also on our website, you'll be able to find our upcoming public education webinars. If you have any suggestions of talks that you would love for us to host or like to have more information on, please respond to the follow-up email, and we are happy to take those suggestions for future talks as well. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much for attending. Oh, and Mental Health America KY will be releasing our back to school mental health resources next week. Go to mhaky.org to get fabulous resources. Thank you so much, Hannah. Hannah, anything else today?
No, I just want to thank Dr. Rose and thank KPF for their partnership and just let folks know that we are here to assist however we can. And our participation in these webinars is thanks to funding from the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. We'll see you all soon. Have a great day. Bye.